Hare Krishna, dear devotees. Welcome back to the daily readings of Srila Prabhupada's books. Let me first apologize for being late today. I just was on the phone with the surgeon that's going to be doing my surgeries, and we were making kind of strategies, possibilities. So that's why I'm late. Hare Krishna. To all of you out there in cyberspace, perhaps maybe some persons who haven't come to this reading because now it's being promoted by the GBC Strategic Planning people and the ISKCON Ministry of Education. They're starting to promote these readings as a model for those who want to start up reading groups. And the first thing I want to say to all of you who might be first attenders, that my philosophy on this is exactly the same as Srila Prabhupada's philosophy. We know that most people are not scholars, and they can't become scholars, but Prabhupada assured all of us that if we just hear his books straight again and again, then the knowledge and the intelligence to understand will be given to us. So we don't have to become scholars, but what we do need to do is develop a taste for hearing about Krishna and Krishna's philosophy and the science of pure devotional service, meaning Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam, and and Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita especially, as well as other of Srila Prabhupada's books. But these are the essence of his teachings. So just hear, try to understand, and keep hearing, and keep trying to understand. Ask your questions, have discussions, and in this way, let Srila Prabhupada speak for himself. That's my philosophy, to let Srila Prabhupada speak for himself and enlighten us, because these purports are constructed very carefully by Srila Prabhupada in a way that will enlighten us if we simply go on hearing them again and again. And the more we get a taste, and then get that taste by associating with those who have a taste, and hearing in the association of other devotees. So that is my philosophy of these daily readings. For any of you who might be there trying to assess the situation and maybe even want to develop their own reading groups. Okay, Hare Krishna. That's the introduction. So, before we read the Srimad Bhagavatam, we read the Srimad Bhagavatam Mahima Stotram, which is the glories of Srimad Bhagavatam, a stotra written by Srila Sanatana Goswami. And it goes like this. Sarva Shastrabdi Piyusha, Sarva Vedaika Satpala, Sarva Siddhanta Ratnadya, Sarva Lokaika Drikprada. O nectar from the ocean of all scriptures, singular fruit of all the Vedas, rich mine of the precious gems of all conclusive truths, you are the only giver of sight to all the worlds. Sarva Bhagavata Prana, Srimad Bhagavata Prabho, Kalidwan Dotitaditya, Sri Krishna Parivartita. O life air of all the Supreme Lord's devotees, O Master Srimad Bhagavatam, you are the sun risen in the darkness of Kali. You are the exact image of Sri Krishna. Paramananda Pataya, Prema Varshakshadayate, Sarvada Sarvasevyaya, Sri Krishnaya Namostume. I bow down to you, who were supremely blissful to read. Your every syllable pours down a flood of prema. You can always be served by everyone. You are Sri Krishna himself. Madeka Bando Matsangin, Madguro Man Mahadana, Manishdadaga Mad Bhagya, Mad Anandana Mostute. My only friend, my constant companion, my spiritual master, my great wealth, my savior, my good fortune, my source of ecstasy, I bow down to you. Asadu sadhuta dayin adini chuchata kada hanamuncha gadachin mam premna rit kantayotspudha. O bestower of saintliness to the unsaintly, O exalter of the most fallen, please never leave me. Always appear in my heart and my voice with pure love. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So, as I was saying earlier, the teachings in the Srimad Bhagavatam, Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam, and Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita contain all knowledge assimilatable by man in this age of Kali Yuga. And it's organized in such a way that things are repeated, and each time they're repeated, they're unpacked a little bit more. And especially this subject matter that Krishna is speaking now in the 22nd chapter, the enumeration of the elements of material creation, he spoke in the form of Kapila Dev in the third canto, and also in the second canto there's some discussion, and the first canto there's some discussion of the creation, material creation. But here Krishna pulls it all together, and the verses in the purports are very, very enlightening, very precise, and we can learn so much. So let us hear. Enumeration of the elements of material creation by Krishna himself, the source of creation. Beginning with text 43. My dear Uddhava, material bodies are constantly undergoing creation and destruction by the force of time, whose swiftness is imperceptible. But because of the subtle nature of time, no one sees this. 44. The different stages of transformation of all material bodies occur just like those of the flame of a candle, the current of a river, or the fruits of a tree. Purport. The wavering flame of a candle sometimes waxes brightly and again sometimes weak. Finally it vanishes altogether. The waves of a flowing river rise and fall, creating innumerable shapes and patterns. The fruits of a tree gradually take birth, grow, ripen, sweeten, and eventually rot and die. Similarly, one can easily understand that one's own body is undergoing constant transformation, and that the body is certainly subject to old age, disease, and death. At different times of life, the body exhibits degrees of sexual potency, physical strength, desire, wisdom, and so on. As the body grows old, physical strength diminishes, but one's knowledge may increase even as the body undergoes such transformation. Material birth and death occur within the realm of segmented time. The birth, creation, or production of a material object immediately connects it with a segmented sequence of subtle time within the material world. Thus its destruction or death is inevitable. The irresistible force of time moves so subtly that only the most intelligent can perceive it. Just as the candle flame gradually diminishes as the flowing currents move within the river, or as fruits gradually ripen on a tree, the material body is steadily moving toward inevitable death. The temporary body should therefore never be confused with the eternal, unchanging spirit soul. Text 45. Although the illumination of a lamp consists of innumerable rays of light undergoing constant creation, transformation, and destruction, a person with illusory intelligence who sees the light for a moment will speak falsely, saying, "This is the light of the lamp." As one observes a flowing river, ever new water passes by and goes far away. Yet a foolish person, observing one point in the river, falsely states, "This is the water of the river." Similarly, although the material body of a human being is constantly undergoing transformations, those who are simply wasting their lives falsely think and say that each particular stage of the body is the person's real identity. Purport. Although one may say this is the light of the lamp, there are innumerable rays of light being created, transformed, and destroyed at every moment. And although one may speak of the water in the river, there is ever new supply of different water molecules passing by. Similarly, when one meets a young child, one accepts that particular transitory phase of the body as the actual identity of the person, considering him to be a child. One also considers an old body to be an old person. In fact, however, the material body of a human being, just like the waves of a river or the radiation of a lamp, is merely a transformation of the three modes of material nature. The potency of the Supreme Lord. The real identity of a person is spirit soul, part and parcel of Lord Krishna. But as Lord Krishna proves in this verse, a conditioned soul is incapable of observing or understanding the subtle movements of time. With the gross vision of material consciousness, one cannot ascertain the subtle segments of material manifestation which are impelled by the Lord Himself as time. The word Mrishayusham in this verse indicates those who are uselessly wasting their time in ignorance without understanding the instructions of the Lord. Such persons gullibly accept any particular phase of the body to be the actual identity of the spirit soul within the body. Because the spirit soul is not subject to material transformation, when he engages himself in the eternal, variegated pleasure of Krishna consciousness, loving service to the Supreme Lord, he will experience no further ignorance and suffering. Text 46. A person does not actually take birth out of the seed of past activities, nor, being immortal, does he die. By illusion, the living being appears to be born and to die, just as fire in connection with firewood appears to begin and then cease to exist. Purport. The element fire exists perpetually within the material creation, but in connection with a particular piece of wood, fire apparently comes into existence and ceases to exist. Similarly, the living entity is eternal, but in connection with a particular body, he apparently takes birth and dies. The reactions of karma thus impose an illusory suffering or enjoyment upon the living entity, but they do not cause the entity himself to change his eternal nature. In other words, karma represents a cycle of illusion in which each illusory activity produces another. Krishna consciousness stops this cycle of karma by engaging the living being in spiritual activities in the loving service of the Lord. By such Krishna consciousness, one can escape the illusory chain of fruitive reactions. Text 47. Impregnation, gestation, birth, infancy, childhood, youth, middle age, old age, and death are the 9 ages of the body. 48. Although the material body is different from the self, because of the ignorance due to material association, one falsely identifies oneself with the superior and inferior bodily connections. Sometimes a fortunate person is able to give up such mental concoction. Purport. One who has received the special mercy of the Supreme Lord is able to give up the mental concoction of bodily identification. Thus, there is always a chance of escaping the cycle of birth and death. 49. By the death of one's father or grandfather, one can surmise one's own death, and by the birth of one's son, one can understand the condition of one's own birth. A person who thus realistically understands the creation and destruction of material bodies is no longer subject to these dualities. Purport. The Lord has described the 9 stages of the material body, beginning with impregnation, gestation, and birth. One may argue that a living entity cannot remember his presence in the mother's womb, nor his birth and early infancy. The Lord therefore states here that one can experience these phases of bodily existence by studying one's own child. Similarly, although one may hope to live forever by experiencing the death of one's father, grandfather, or great-grandfather, one has definite proof that the material body will die. A sober person, knowing the soul to be eternal, therefore gives up false identification with the temporary, unreliable body and takes shelter of the devotional service of the Lord. By this process, one can escape the artificial imposition of birth and death. Text 50. One who observes the birth of a tree from its seed and the ultimate death of the tree after maturity certainly remains a distinct observer, separate from the tree. In the same way, the witness of the birth and death of the material body remains separate from it. Purport. As a reference to trees, vipaka indicates the final transformation called death. In reference to other types of plants, such as rice, vipaka indicates the stage of maturity, in which death also occurs. Thus, by common observation, one can understand the actual position of one's material body and one's position as the transcendental observer. Text 51. An intelligent man, failing to distinguish himself from material nature, thinks nature to be real. By contact with it, he becomes completely bewildered and enters into the cycle of material existence. Purport. A similar verse is found in Srimad Bhagavatam 1.7.5. Yaya samohito jiva atmanam tri gunatmakam paro pi manyate manute nartam tat kritam chabipadyate. Due to this external energy, the living entity, although transcendental to the three modes of material nature, thinks of himself as a material product, and thus undergoes the reactions of material miseries. Text 52. Made to wander because of his fruitive work, the conditioned soul, by contact with the mode of goodness, takes birth among the sages, or demigods. By contact with the mode of passion, he becomes a demon, or human being, and by association with the mode of ignorance, he takes birth as a ghost, or in the animal kingdom. Purport. The word tiryaktvam means the status of an animal, which includes all lower forms of life, such as beasts, birds, insects, fish, and plants. Text 53. Just as one might imitate persons whom one sees dancing and singing, similarly, the soul, although never the doer of material activities, becomes captivated by material intelligence, and is thus forced to imitate its qualities. Purport. Sometimes people are captivated by professional singers and dancers, and imitate within their minds the musical rhythms and melodies of the performers, along with their romantic, humorous, or heroic emotions. People sing songs heard on the radio and imitate dances and dramatic performances seen on television or in movies and theaters, entering into the emotions and art of the performer. The conditioned soul is similarly captivated by the concoctions of the material mind and intelligence, which convince him that he can become the enjoyer of the material world. Although different from the material body, and never the actual performer of its activities, the conditioned soul is induced to engage his body in material activities, which entangle him in the cycle of birth and death. One should not accept the illicit propositions of material intelligence, but rather one should engage himself fully in the service of the Lord in Krishna consciousness. Text 54 and 55. The soul's material life, his experience of sense gratification, is actually false, O descendant of Dasharha, just like trees' appearance in quivering when the trees are reflected in agitated water, or like the earth's appearance of spinning due to one spinning his eyes around, or like the world of a fantasy or dream. Purport. Trees appear to be swaying when reflected in agitated water. And similarly, when one is sitting on a moving boat, the trees on the shore appear to be moving. When the wind whips up the water, creating waves, the water appears to have movement of its own, although it is actually being moved by the wind. The conditioned soul in material life does not perform any activities, but rather the material body, with the consent of the illusioned living entity, is being moved by the modes of nature. Shall I read that again? With the consent of the living entity. The conditioned soul in material life does not perform any activities, but rather the material body, with the consent of the illusioned living entity, is being moved by the modes of nature. One imposes this external movement upon oneself, considering oneself to be dancing, singing, running, dying, conquering, and so on, although these are merely interactions of the external body with the modes of nature. Text 56. For one who is meditating on sense gratification, material life, although lacking factual existence, does not go away, just as the unpleasant experiences of a dream do not. Purport. One may object that if Lord Krishna insists that material life is false, then why should one endeavor to stop it? The Lord therefore explains here that although not factual, material life stubbornly continues for one addicted to sense gratification, just as a frightening dream continues for one merged in sleep. The word avidyamana, not existing, means that material life is based on mental concoction in which one thinks, I am a man, I am a woman, I am a doctor, I am a senator, I am a street sweeper, and so on. A conditioned soul enthusiastically performs his activities based on the imaginary identification with the body. Thus, although the spirit soul exists and the body exists, the false identification with the body does not exist. Material life, based on a false idea, has no factual existence. One awakens from a dream. After one awakens from a dream, the dim reflection of the dream may linger in one's memory. Similarly, one engaging in the devotional service of the Lord may be troubled sometimes by the dim reflection of sinful life. One should therefore become strong in Krishna consciousness by hearing the Lord's instructions to Sri Uddhava. Text 57. Therefore, O Uddhava, do not try to enjoy sense gratification with the material senses. See how illusion, based on material dualities, prevents one from realizing the self. Purport. Everything that exists is the potency and property of the Supreme Lord, meant to be used in His loving service. Seeing material objects as separate from the Lord, and thus meant to be possessed and enjoyed by oneself, is called Vaikalpikam Brahman, the illusion of material duality. When selecting one's personal object of enjoyment, such as food, clothing, residence, or vehicle, one considers the relative quality of the object to be acquired. Consequently, in material life, one is in constant anxiety, trying to acquire the most excellent sense gratification for one's personal pleasure. If one realizes everything as the property of the Lord, however, he will see everything as meant for the Lord's pleasure. He will feel no personal anxiety because he is satisfied simply to be engaged in the Lord's loving service. It is not possible to exploit the property of the Lord and at the same time advance in self-realization. Text 58 and 59. Even though neglected, insulted, ridiculed, or envied by bad men, or even though repeatedly agitated by being beaten, tied up, or deprived of one's occupation, spat upon, or polluted with urine by ignorant people, one who desires the highest goal in life should, in spite of all these difficulties, use his intelligence to keep himself safe on the spiritual platform. Purport. Throughout history, many of the above-mentioned inconveniences have been experienced by devotees of the Lord. One who is advanced in God consciousness does not allow himself to become obsessed with the material body even in such conditions, but rather keeps the mind fixed on the spiritual platform through proper intelligence. Text 60. Sri Uddhava said, O best of all speakers, please explain to me how I may properly understand this. Text 61. O soul of the universe, the conditioning of one's personality in material life is very strong, and therefore it is very difficult, even for learned men, to tolerate the offenses committed against them by ignorant people. Only your devotees, who are fixed in your loving service, and who have achieved peace by residing at your lotus feet, are able to tolerate such offenses. Purport. Unless one becomes advanced in the process of hearing and chanting the glories of the Lord, theoretical learning cannot make one actually saintly. One's conditioned personality, the result of long material association, is very difficult to overcome. Therefore, we should humbly take shelter of the lotus feet of the Supreme Lord, who has so wonderfully explained to Sri Uddhava the real meaning of knowledge. Thus end the purports of the humble servants of His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, to the 11th Canto, 22nd chapter of Srimad Bhagavatam, entitled Enumeration of the Elements of Material Creation. Jai Shri Shri Krishna, the knower and the creator and of Sankhya philosophy, the source of the absolute truth, the explainer of the absolute truth. Ki Jai. Okay, now we have a moment of decision. We started about what, 10 after? Quarter after? Huh?
20 minutes after.
20 minutes after.
Quarter after.
Quarter after. So that's about 35 minutes. It's not long enough, but at the same time, it's a very, very nice stopping point, stopping place. I think I'll move on. Chapter 23. The Song of the Avanti Brahmana. This chapter tells the story of a mendicant sannyasi from the Avanti country as an example of how one should tolerate the disturbances and offenses created by evil persons. So last chapter we heard about how we have to do that and how these identification with these people and these events in the material world is illusory. And now we're going to hear a practical example of how one should tolerate the disturbances and offenses created by evil persons. So this is the essence. We must apply what we hear. Before we can apply what we hear, we have to understand what we hear. We have to follow the logic. We have to follow the analogies. We have to be able to see it for ourselves. Nobody can see it for us. But it's explained in the Bhagavatam and in these purports so graphically and so succinctly and so clearly that it's possible. But still, we have to have the example. So here we go. Song of the Avanti Brahmani. The harsh words of uncouth persons pierce the heart even more severely than arrows. Yet a mendicant Brahmana from the city of Avanti, even while being attacked by wicked men, considered this trouble to be simply the consequence of his own past deeds and tolerated it with utmost sobriety. Previously, the Brahmana had been an agriculturalist and merchant. He had been extremely greedy, miserly, and prone to anger. As a result, his wife, sons, daughters, relatives, and servants were all deprived of every kind of enjoyment and gradually came to behave unaffectionately toward him. In due course of time, thieves family members, and providence took away the sum total of his wealth. Finding himself without any property and abandoned by everyone, the Brahmana developed a deep sense of renunciation. He considered how the earning of and preservation of wealth involved great effort, fear, anxiety, and confusion. Because of wealth, there arise 15 unwanted items. Thievery. Because of wealth, there arise 15 unwanted items. Thievery, violence, lying, deception, lust, anger, pride, feverishness, disagreement, hatred, distrust, conflict, attachment to women, gambling, and intoxication. And that comes from what? Can someone remember? Simply from wealth. Doesn't sound such a good bargain to me. When this meditation arose in his heart, the Brahmana could understand that the Supreme Lord, Sri Hari, had somehow become satisfied with him. He felt that only because the Lord was pleased with him had the apparently unfavorable turn of events in his life occurred. He was grateful that a sense of detachment had arisen in his heart and considered it the factual means for delivering his soul. In this connection, he determined to engage the duration of his life in the worship of Lord Hari, and thus accepted the mendicant order of Tridandi Sannyas. Subsequently, he would enter different villages to beg charity, but the people would harass and disturb him. But he simply tolerated all this, remaining firm as a mountain. He remained fixed in his chosen spiritual practice and sang a song renowned as the Bhikshu Gita. Neither mortal persons, the demigods, the soul, the ruling planets, the reactions of work, nor time are the causes of one's unhappiness and distress. Rather, the mind alone is their cause. Because it is the mind that makes the spirit soul wander in the cycle of material life. The real purpose of all charity, religiosity, and so forth is to bring the mind under control. A person who has already composed his mind in meditation has no need for these other processes. And for a person who is incapable of fixing his mind, they are of no practical use. The false conception of material ego binds the transcendental soul to material sense objects. The Avanti Brahmana therefore became determined to bring himself over the insurmountable ocean of material existence by rendering service to the lotus feet of the Supreme Lord, Mukunda, with the same perfect faith in the Lord exhibited by the great devotees of the past. Only when one can fix his intelligence on the lotus feet of the Supreme Personality of Godhead can the mind be completely subdued. This is the essence of all practical prescriptions for spiritual advancement. And this is a good stopping place. We heard the analytical analysis by Krishna of the elements and how they interact with the soul and the nature and time. And now we're hearing of the example of one who has done that practically. So that we will continue to hear about that tomorrow. And we'll stop the reading tonight and ask if there are any reflections, any point or idea that has stuck in the mind of those who are hearing or wanting to have further discussion on something they heard, or questions or whatever. We have Radharaman here, the local prince and saintly prince, owner of this place which we are taking shelter of.
Maharaj, I was just wondering if you could comment a little bit further on the last paragraph of the chapter we just finished. I thought it was interesting in the purport. They said, unless one becomes advanced in the process of hearing and chanting the glories of the Lord, Supreme Lord, theoretical learning cannot make one actually saintly. What is it? Well, I'll just finish the paragraph and answer the question. One's conditioned personality, the result of long mature association, is very difficult to overcome. Therefore, we should humbly take shelter of the lotus feet of the Supreme Lord, who has so wonderfully explained to Sri Uddhava the real meaning of knowledge. What does he exactly mean by the way that he puts it, becoming advanced in the process of hearing and chanting? Like he could just say, if one hears and chants the glories of the Lord, but he's saying if one becomes advanced in the...
Well, you're now touching on the idea of the difference between hearing and just listening. Hearing there's a way to study and learn information content, the historical events, names of the persons, the reasons why things happen, and so on and so forth. But the hearing, when one becomes advanced in the process of hearing and chanting the glories of the Lord, then we rise above theoretical learning. I liken theoretical learning to academic approach to learning. You have a subject matter, you divide it into different categories, you memorize it, you explain it, get your degree or your letters behind your name or whatever. And then mostly, there are higher intellectuals who go deeper and deeper and deeper. But mainly, when we get our degree, especially our bachelor's degrees, then we learn it, we pass the test, write our dissertation, and we go out into the world and we forget most of it. Just like we've been learning in the last chapter, something in a dream, it's illusory, obviously, but while you're in it, you think it's real. And then when it stops, it may linger in the mind after a while, but then eventually it fades and it goes away. So real hearing and chanting, and this is interesting because this word hearing and chanting, Prabhupada explains in a different way in another place. He says, hearing and explaining is the way to realize the subject matter. You hear, and in order to explain it, you have to understand it. It's active, it's not passive. You sit and it's good to sit and hear. If you hear submissively, real hearing means to hear submissively, without argument, without in your mind doing something while the hearing process is going on. Like for instance, if you're hearing and you hear something and then your mind starts to think, I heard something like this before, but actually it was different, and this is different. And by the time the explanation is being said to you, your mind has taken you away, so you can't hear. That's why people who are argumentative, they don't generally get it. They don't actually understand it. And therefore they can't see through that knowledge and apply it to themselves and change their behavior, change their conception of themselves and life and material existence. Therefore they can't detach themselves from it and attach themselves to the lotus feet of the Lord. So real hearing and chanting is described in this paragraph. Unless one becomes advanced in the process of hearing and chanting the glories of the Supreme Lord, theoretical learning cannot make one actually saintly. So that theoretical learning is what I'm talking about when I talk about academic approach and just information content. You memorize information content. It doesn't touch the soul. It doesn't change one's vision. It doesn't change one's consciousness. One's conditioned personality, the result of long material association, is very difficult to overcome. Therefore, we should humbly take shelter of the lotus feet of the Supreme Lord. So the serious process of hearing and chanting the glories of the Lord means to take it takes one's heart and one's intelligence to the lotus feet of the Lord, and then you surrender, you submit. And then from within the heart, when the Lord sees that you're actually serious about understanding and about taking shelter of the source of real knowledge, then one can understand the real meaning of knowledge. Does that make any sense, what I just said? Hearing and explaining is better than reading. There's a lot of talk about now, you have to read Prabhupada's books, you have to read Prabhupada's books, you have to read Prabhupada's books. But reading Prabhupada's books doesn't just mean sit there and turn the pages and not really understanding what you're saying, but I'm doing my 41 pages, you know. It's good to make a vow. I know my best friend, Vaishika Prabhu, he's been reading 41 pages a day since I can remember. I mean, probably for more than 40 years, at least 45 years, practically without stopping. And therefore, and this is my point, by repeatedly hearing and trying to understand, and then explaining it to others, and again, repeatedly hearing, trying to understand, explaining to others, discussing it with other devotees. This is the process by which the knowledge sinks in and one gets realization by the grace of the Lord, because you can only do that you can't do that unless you're actually taking shelter of the lotus feet of the Lord. Bhagavatam is non-different than Krishna. Bhagavad Gita is non-different than Krishna. Holy name of the Lord is non-different than Krishna. So to advance in devotional service, hearing and chanting, means to realize that. To realize that you're with Krishna. When these are Krishna talking to us. Then you become enlivened, and your faith deepens, and your doubts become smashed to smithereens. But it's difficult because of our lifetimes of conditioning. We're so attached to the mind, so attached to the body. So we have to overcome that. That's what it means to become advanced in hearing and chanting. To overcome the conditioning. And that takes perseverance. When Devahuti inquired from Kapilideva, her son, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, I can understand how I'm not the gross body. It's obvious. I'm going to die and my body's going to go into ashes. So that can't be me. But how this intelligence and the subtle body and the soul, consciousness are all merged, that is beyond me completely. I can't understand it at all. What should I do? I'm just a simple woman. And she's taking the role of a conditioned soul. And he said, yes, it is difficult. Therefore you must hear very seriously for a long time from the proper source until you understand. And that's the way. It's the mercy. This is Krishna's mercy that he comes in the form of the Bhagavatam. He comes and speaks to Uddhava, speaks the Gita to Arjuna. Lord Chaitanya comes and speaks to all these great personalities and convinces them devotional service in Chaitanya Charitamrita. And then associates with all its intimate disciples and followers, and associates, and exhibits the loving exchanges that go on between those who are actually in love with Krishna. So it's no light thing. It's not a academic. When I remember when we were kids, we were arguing about something, and we wanted to defeat the other person. We'd say, that's just academic. Listen to this. And then we'd do something to convince the other person beyond words. The more you hear about Krishna, the more your heart becomes purified. The more your heart becomes purified, the more you want to hear about Krishna. The more you want to hear about Krishna, the more Krishna becomes pleased with you. And if you do it over a long enough period of time, and it could be a minute, could be 100 lifetimes, that when Krishna becomes pleased with you, then you'll understand. It's not that you can understand by your strength and the power of your own intelligence. I think that explains that paragraph. We'll read it again. Unless one becomes advanced in the process of hearing and chanting the glories of the Supreme Lord, theoretical learning cannot make one actually saintly. One's conditioned personality, the result of long material association, is very difficult to overcome. Therefore, we should humbly take shelter of the lotus feet of the Supreme Lord, who has so wonderfully explained to Sri Uddhava the real meaning of knowledge. What did Prabhupada say? Well, Krishna said, and Prabhupada purported, real knowledge begins with humility. Knowledge begins with humility. When we actually hear how profound these thoughts are, and how we can't think those thoughts, then we can submit to them. What we read, that 55th verse, the first chapter of Adi Lila, submission. Submissiveness is the, what was it? Submissiveness is the only requirement, or the only, I can't remember word for word. Can you find it? It's the 55th chapter, 55th verse. Adi Lila, chapter 1, 55th verse. You got it here?
Mm.
The Supreme Lord, who is the cause of the material energy, yes. The entire material manifestation develops and exists because the Supreme Personality of Godhead enters it as Paramatma, or the Supersoul. The personality of Godhead, in his all-pervading feature of Paramatma, enters every entity, from the biggest to the most minute. His existence can be realized by one who has the single qualification of submissiveness, and who thereby becomes a surrendered soul. The development of submissiveness is the cause of proportionate spiritual realization, by which one can ultimately meet the Supreme Lord in person, as a man meets another man face to face. What else? Do we have any other reflections and questions from out there in cyberspace?
There's one from Rati Manjari. She says, Dear Guru Maharaj, please accept my humble obeisances. This is a small point of appreciation. I like to hear the point of how apparently it is a characteristic quality of all conditioned souls to imitate artists by singing and dancing in the way they do, and take pleasure from that. I thought that this was mostly done by people who are artistically inclined, like me. But now we heard that everyone is so inclined. And then my wandering mind thought of how the gopis and the cowherd boys also did that, imitating the pastimes of their wonderful friend Krishna by dancing and singing in the forest.
Yeah, well, that's the source of everything. Everything comes from Krishna. Everything comes from Goloka Vrindavan. And everything comes from the residents of Goloka Vrindavan. All the arts, all the, everything comes. The singing, the musical instruments, the dancing, the poetic expressions, the drama. So once we kind of get an idea that, yeah, that's where the source is, and that's where I can actually enjoy, then we'll want to go back there. But it's not that just because we imitate that and enjoy, some movie song or some, drama about some, love affairs in the material world, that is to be, that's just imitation. That doesn't satisfy us. But we should understand that it's like Prabhupada said, if there's a counterfeit bill, then you know there has to be a real bill. Because otherwise, where would the counterfeit come from? So you're trying in the material world to dance and chant and enjoy and have party and this and that. It's hard to give up. Like now we have this pandemic, and still people are, just defiantly going and having parties anyway. And after they're so stupid, they have parties and they think, oh, let's have a party with those who have it, and we can get it, and then we can get over it, and then we'll be okay. That's the material intelligence. That's the way it works. It's like mirage looks like the, water, and then the animal looks out. He's in a little tiny pond of water that's an oasis in the desert, and he looks out and he sees this vast body of water. He says, what am I doing here? That's where the real water is. And he goes out running in the desert and dies. But it's a fact that we are, the way to overcome the material conditioning and identifications of the body and mind is to practice organizing our life in such a way as that we can do the things that are done in the spiritual world, and as much as possible in the way that they are done in the spiritual world. Which is another important point about hearing, and why it's so important to hear about the pastimes of the Lord in the spiritual world. to hear the sounds that come from the spiritual world that are not temporary. So if our dancing and singing and so forth put us more deeply into the body, more attached to sense gratification, then we know we're going in the right and wrong direction. If our hearing and chanting and listening and dancing and singing and partying bring us to the point of wanting to understand more about Krishna, more taste for hearing and chanting about Krishna, then we know we're going in the right direction. That's the litmus test. And yes, it is a fact that everybody has a taste for chanting and dancing and this, that, but the taste is dictated by the modes of nature. Some people, they like acid rock or hard rock. Some people like Beethoven and Bach and symphonic music more in the mode of goodness, and some like devotional ragas and devotional melodies and songs about the Supreme Lord. So in ignorance and passion and goodness, there's music, there's everything. And there's transcendental music. We develop our qualities by association. That's it. Whoa. We just did our hour. Well, thanks, Rati, for that lovely reflection. And it got me going there for a second. Now we've come to our hour. I'm over my quota. I've used up my quota of sitting in a chair at one time. So I'd like to thank you all again and welcome you all back, especially if some of you are coming back for the first time. Please come back and hear, just hear and chant and appreciate and try to understand and hear and chant over and over, cover to cover, Srila Prabhupada's books. And guaranteed you will go back to Godhead by doing this in the association of devotees. Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Gaur Premanandi Hari Hari Bol. See you tomorrow, same place, same station, same time. Hare Krishna.